Welcome to the Billable Mom podcast, led by attorney Cari Rincker, where we discuss working motherhood, but especially geared to professional mothers who are trying to juggle their time. Our time is precious, both at work and at home. We talk time management and productivity hacks, the struggles of being a working parent, and provide a community where other billable moms are also trying to calm the chaos 6 minutes at a time. Listen to stories of other working moms, but especially lawyer moms. Navigate the waters balancing career and the ever-present demands of motherhood.
Hi, I'm Cari Rincker, and I'm the Billable Mom, and I'm excited for today's podcast because we have Ruth Woolery in the house, and Ruth and I actually work together. So I'm recording today from my office in New York City, but we are usually in the same office building there in Shelbyville, Illinois. Ruth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so why don't you take a moment, Ruth, and introduce yourself to the listeners? Tell us who you are and maybe your path to becoming a billable mother.
Sure. My name is Ruth Woolery. I am an associate attorney in Cari's Shelbyville office. I have been working with Cari for about 2 years now. Prior to that, I've only been out of law school about 6 years, a little over 6 years. Prior to that, I was both a stay-at-home mom and a part-time paralegal, married with 4 kids. And that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
4 kids feels like 100 kids, to me, because I'm barely getting on to my life with 2 kids. So I'd like to back up a little bit, Ruth, and talk about your path to even going to law school. Like, what made you make that decision to go to professional school? And I believe at that point in time, you actually had small children. Is that right?
I did. So I was somewhat lucky in that I knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. I was introduced to John Grisham books way too young, and my entire life, I knew that I was going to be an attorney. What that was going to look like or how I was going to get there, I wasn't 100% sure. So for me, I made the decision to get married and have kids before starting my career. So like you said, by the time I got to law school, I did have 4 kids already. My youngest was actually about 4 months old when I started law school.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So when you had your first son, where were you in your life professionally?
Yeah, so my husband was still in school. He was getting his master's, so we were traveling around a little bit. His placements were about a year apiece. So I was working, anytime, any way I could in the legal field. I worked, part-time as a legal secretary in a small firm. I would work at the prosecutor's office part-time for a few hours a week just to kind of get my foot in the door and learn as much as I could, but still juggling, having a young child at home.
So how did you navigate childcare during that chapter of your life?
So we were lucky enough that my husband had a very flexible schedule. So we were between him and we did use in-home daycare for those times when I would need to work outside of the home. But honestly, for me, I needed that time. I needed that time outside the home.
And you actually had your second child while you were working prior to law school. Is that right, Ruth?
I did. So my second child I was working at a prosecutor's office in Nebraska. And actually, after the birth of my second child, then I was able to take some time off and stay home with both her, my oldest 2, and then while I had my third. Yeah.
And so how long were you basically a stay-at-home mom, or you weren't working during that time? Is that right, Ruth?
I was not. So I had at least a solid 4 years where I did nothing but raise my kids. Yeah, my 3 oldest. Yeah.
So I have to admit that there is part of me that is very jealous. I've had many conversations with my own family that sometimes I wish that I could just stay at home and be with my kids. And I'm curious now that you have worked on both of those bookends, right? Whenever you had 2 small children and then on the other side. And did you miss work during this time when you were a stay-at-home mom?
I definitely did. I would not trade that time for anything, but while I was in the middle of it, it's hard. It's a hard job in and of itself. And I missed that outside work, those interactions. I like to learn, and I felt like I was kind of stunted. You've got a period of time where you're not really learning anything new other than caring for your kids, and it was definitely hard. And I definitely missed the time in the workforce. Yeah.
So what advice would you give for women that are, maybe they have young children, maybe they're challenging with that decision? Should I, stay in the workplace? Should I be at home? What advice would you give to those women?
I think the best advice is to know what you really want, right? And then to stand firm in it. So no two women are the same. No two families are the same. For me, at the time, it worked. We had just moved to a new community. I wasn't ready to start looking for a new job. It just stretched on for 4 years. It's just kind of the way you kind of get stuck in your routine. But if you're already working, and if you're already in the workforce and then decide to have kids and then have to make that decision, you really have to know what works for you financially, what works for you, for your sanity. There are a lot of different factors that come into play. And I would just say, be true to yourself, know what you want, and then go for it.
Yeah, I feel like every Monday I try to work to Friday, right? And then on the Fridays, I'm trying to get through to Monday morning because I can't wait to get back to work again. So it's just an interesting, ebb and flow. Childcare is hard. I have no clue how stay-at-home moms do it because, you don't really get a break. And so, how did you make it through?
So for me, I, am blessed to have a very hands-on husband. So, there were those days where the second he walked in the door, I was like, I'm off the clock, you take him. And I would go hide somewhere. A lot of times, just for us, it just worked that he would always do the bedtime routine. So I could have that time to, whether it was to work out, whether it was to read a book, just not be on kid duty. But if you are a true, solo, don't really have that in-home help, you just have to build your team around you and take the time where you can find it.
So talk to me a little bit about that. I'm going to call it me time. Like, how do you find it? I mean, now you're sitting here, you've got 4 kids, you're in a different phase in your life, but I feel like through every one of your stages of motherhood, you've always made time for you. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to have me time, whether that's, on a daily basis, hopefully at least on a daily basis, whether it's an hour, whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's, an hour and a half, just kind of depends. But for me, there are a handful of things that I like to do that don't involve work and kids. I like to work out, I like to read, and I like to crochet. So I figure if I've got an hour of time, somewhere in the day, just pick one of them and do it. Sometimes I don't have the energy to do any of them and I just watch TV. But I think it's incredibly important to find that 1 hour, that time every day to yourself to just refuel, right? Your kids need you to be energized and to have the energy to deal with them on a daily basis.
Yeah. When are you finding that time? I mean, are you finding that crevice like after you leave work and before you go home? Are you doing it early in the morning? Are you doing it at night after the kids go to sleep?
So I am not a morning person at all. Never have been, never will be. When my kids were younger, I would find that time in the evening after they went to bed because they went to bed a lot earlier. Now that my kids are older, they're usually involved in something after school, at least the 3 older ones. There's always something keeping them busy after school. So I have found that the time between when I leave the office and when we have dinner or when they finally get home from their activities, that's my time. And I try and use that, as much as I can.
That's great. So let's skip ahead a little bit because, you were a stay-at-home mom for a few years, I think around 4 years, and then you made your way to law school. And I think at that point in time, you had your 4th child, a baby, really, at that point in time. So talk to us about that. I literally cannot imagine. I barely made it through law school without kids, much less with 4. So tell us more.
Well, and I hear that all the time, that it's I don't know how you did it, but I didn't know any other way, right? If I can't imagine law school with just having to worry about myself. Um, because I never had that opportunity. But yeah, after I actually went back to work in the legal field as a paralegal after my third child turned about a year. And so I worked part-time as a paralegal for about 3 or 4 years solid before I finally, decided, no, I need to do what I need to do. I want to go to law school. I want to do this. Uh, and of course, at the time that I retook the LSAT, because it's only good for 10 years, and started making those applications, I did not have baby number 4 yet. And then, of course, along comes baby number 4. And I was faced with that decision. Do I still go ahead and go to law school, or do I put it off even longer and potentially never do it? And for me, it was time. I needed to do that for myself. And even with the struggles that came along with it, I mean, I hated coming home at night and having my baby already be in bed. I hated not having that time with him, but at the same time, I was doing something for me. I was doing something for my family. And my kids, my older kids, they were proud. They were excited. They liked that I was doing it. So it just was the right choice for us in the end.
I mean, if you think about it at that moment in time, I mean, you're really being a good role model for your older children, showing them that you're able to get it done. You're able to manage your time and go after your own goals. So I think that that's great. But law school is also no joke. And you were, I think you went part-time, but part-time is like only one less class than full-time. And so what were sort of your time management strategies that you learned during that chapter of your life?
Well, I think it's kind of funny because a lot of people, when they talk to law students, they always say, treat it like a job, right? Put in your law school hours, 8 to 5, whatever that is. That did not work for me. So I just knew it wouldn't work for me. I had to commute an hour one way to get to school. I knew that I could not do that 5 days a week, all week with my kids at home. The older ones were now in some activities. I just didn't want to miss that much time with them. So I did. I started part-time, which was 4 of the 5 core classes that first year. But after that first year, I kind of decided I didn't want to extend that time. So what I would do is I would take mini terms, I would take summer classes, whatever I could to get those hours in. And actually, those were some of the classes that I enjoyed the most, were those mini term and summer classes. They were more specialized in specific areas of law. But I also, when I was at school, even if I had time between classes, that was my school time. When I was at home, it was my home time, with the exception of weekends. I spent a lot of time on the weekends preparing for the next week. That was really, I would try and prepare for as many days as I could for the week, over the weekend. And there certainly were times when I would be at dance class or a baseball game and doing my reading for the week. I mean, it just happened. So yes, it was incredibly hard, but anybody can do it.
So if you could roll back the clock and do it all over again in terms of your law school experience, I mean, what would you have changed anything?
Difficult to say, only because if I'm completely honest, I probably would not have gone to law school and would have pursued a full-time paralegal career. Only because kind of a cost benefit,
Sure.
weighing with cost and benefits. But at the same time,
go ahead.
The example that I set for my children, I can see now that they're almost 10 years older than they were when I started, the example that I set and what they took away from that, it was worth it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. So what advice would you give to mothers who are maybe just drowning in childcare right now, and maybe that they are thinking about going to law school or business school or nursing school or whatever their dream is, and how do they navigate it through the trenches of motherhood?
I would first say take the leap if it's something you really want, because you will figure out a way to make it work. So that would be step one, take the leap, whether it's just filing the application, whatever that first leap is. Secondly, I would say try different routines. Everybody is different. Everybody's time feels different. What worked for me isn't going to work for you. What works for, somebody else isn't going to work for me. So just don't be afraid to try different routines to see what works for you, because there are so many different school options available right now that we didn't have, 15, 20 years ago, that you should be able to find a schedule that works.
Yeah, that's so
something you
true.
really want to do.
I mean, the University of Illinois now, their MBA program is 100% online now, so it's just it's a different world. All right, so to fast forward, you graduated from law school and you start working at a law firm. And at this point, you've got 4 kids, right? You had 4 kids during law school as well. So, but this is your first sort of like 8 to 5 job with the 4 kids. So talk to us about that transition.
That was hard. That was by far the hardest 6 months to a year of my life, and hands down. And I feel like I've been through a lot, but that was definitely the hardest year of my life. I was, like you said, my first 8 to 5 job. I was commuting, 40 minutes one way. I was learning a new field of law. My prior experience had been with personal injury in a personal injury firm, and this was a family law firm. So even though I had taken family law in law school, I was learning a whole new field of law. I was learning, just a new job in general. And I was burnt out and exhausted 24/7. And I would go home and I would literally just collapse on the bed. I had no energy to, do anything. And at that point, my 3 older were involved in activities, evening games, Boy Scouts, all kinds of things. And I just had nothing left to give. So that was a very, very difficult time.
So I'm curious if you could go back to the Ruth during that chapter, what advice would you give to her?
I would probably tell her to not give up so quickly. I did not stay with that particular firm and that particular job for any longer than that, because I was so burnt out and really questioned leaving the legal field at that time entirely. But I would have given myself more time. I was transitioning, like I said, to a new field, a new job, and I needed time. And I didn't really give myself that. And I wish I would have.
So to fast forward, at some point here, you moved to Illinois, which is where we cross paths. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that transition? You're moving to a different state and starting working at another law firm there.
So we moved to Illinois in 2019. I was lucky enough to find a job right here in Shelbyville at that time. The very first time that I've ever worked and lived in the same town. And what that meant for me was time, more time to get to kids' events, more time in the morning. I could not ask for anything better. So one of the things I like to think about is, I talk a lot about what's important to you. And, for some people, it's a certain salary with certain benefits. For me, it's flexible time. It always has been. It always will be. I've got other things that I need to be doing. So that was certainly the best benefit to being in the same town. Yeah.
So what's sort of your advice to other mothers who are perhaps struggling with work-life balance? Let's talk a little bit about how you sort of manage that yourself.
So for me, I feel like I've always been very clear in what I want and what my time means to me. So you really have to know what you want, what your priorities are, and then stick to it. So for me, for example, this afternoon, my daughter has a track meet. So guess what? I'm going to be cutting out an hour early. Allowing your boss to know that, allowing those conversations to be had. For me, that's what works. Not everyone who works and has kids at home is going to have that flexibility or the ability to do that. And if that's the case and you're unhappy with it, don't be afraid to find something else. Because the same thing with school goes with jobs these days. There are 1,000 different ways you can work in the legal field, in any field, really, and find something that fits with your life. Don't kind of conform into a job that you don't love.
So something I've really admired about you, just mother to mother, but also, for two attorneys working in the same law practice, is that I feel like you have done a really nice job setting up containers in your life. Like, this is my work time and I'm really focused. And then this is my home time, my family time, and I'm not thinking about work, for the exception of the occasional emergency, right? For the most part, it's your family time. So what advice do you have for other attorneys on how to navigate that? Because, you and I both know, like, the notifications come, the emails come, the clients start texting or whatever is going on there. Bosses, are hounding you. So how do you navigate those containers?
For me, I have to be strong enough to set those boundaries, right? For me, it comes naturally. Not everybody has that ability to set those things aside. Now, to be fair, I am constantly checking my email, but I am able to quickly decide if it's something that I need to deal with now or something I can put aside until the workday the next day. And that's
you say that, Ruth, but you don't really respond on the weekends or outside of business hours. So,
I don't.
I'm a little surprised sometimes to even hear that, because I think that you have shown that, like, just because you check your email doesn't mean that you have to reply right away, right?
And that's not a natural response for everybody, but I do. I am constantly checking my email. Pretty much anytime I pick up my phone, that's the first app that I open, just to see kind of what's going on, because I'm afraid to miss something. But that also goes to show that, for the most part, nothing is life-threatening. Nothing has to be done immediately. So for me, like I said, it comes naturally. For other people, you might have to turn off those notifications, put the phone aside in a different room. I think you can even set your notifications to a certain time, to go off from 9 to 5, whatever it is. And take those steps so that you can really be diligent in keeping that time separate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. So we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsor. And when we come back, I'd like to talk about your campaign and how you navigated that as a working mother too. This episode of the Billable Mom podcast is brought to you by Rincker Law PLLC, focusing in food, farm, and family. When I'm not a mother juggling two littles at home, I am the principal attorney of this nationally recognized law practice, where we believe that strong communities have both strong families and a food, fiber, and agriculture system. At Rincker Law, not only do we do family and matrimonial law, but we work with entrepreneurs and agriculture producers on business, estate, and succession planning. We are a client-focused, results-driven law practice. At Rincker Law, we also support other billable moms, not only in the workplace, but also with clients, helping them live their dreams both in business and at home. For more information, visit us at www.rinkerlaw.com. Cari Rincker, food, farm, and family. All right. So, Ruth, you are presently a candidate to become state's attorney in Shelby County, Illinois. And on top of, being an associate attorney and having 4 children, you are a candidate for a public official. So how did you navigate that on top of everything else?
Well, it wasn't an easy decision to throw my hat into the race. It definitely took a lot of conversations between myself and my husband, and even some of my older kids. So I actually have an undergraduate degree in political science, and my older kids think it's amazing that I'm actually finally using that. But yeah, so I just felt like there was a need, and I wanted to attempt to serve the public in this way.
Well, and, Jason and I would go to the parades and we would see you out there, what I mean? But it's a different level of a time commitment, as well, when you're a candidate and you're, going to meet and greets and different meetings and things. And so what tips do you have for other people who are maybe considering running for office on top of having a demanding job and family life?
I would say involve your kids. Take them with you. All of my kids walked in at least one parade this past fall. They all enjoyed it. They love the attention. So certainly involve your kids any way you can, when it's appropriate. And then, for me, I feel like I already have that time carved out for me. So that time, my time now gets filled with some of those events. So instead of working out or reading, I would be attending these events. So for me, it was just kind of a shift in how I use my time. But that's not going to work for everybody. So you have to find what works for you and really be flexible with your routines.
That makes a lot of sense. So to shift gears and talk a little bit more about your home life, what tips do you have as far as like home organization?
Not so much home organization, but certainly in maintaining the home, I would say to, again, include your children at an early age. My kids, you need to empower them to have control over their space, their things, and make them really involved in maintaining the home. My kids do their own laundry, for example. Some people don't really want to release that the control over certain things, like the expensive washing machine. I don't really want my kid touching it. Or the dishes, they think they can't do it. But you would be surprised what even young kids can do to help out around the house.
That's great advice. I mean, but I'll have to admit though, when I wash dishes with Jace, he's like flying, water's flying everywhere. So I know that it can certainly change when they
Yes.
get older. Talk to me about your house cleaning schedule, because I know that prior to this, we were chatting. And I believe that you had said that certain chores are sometimes done on certain days. Can you tell me more?
Yeah. So we do try and have a schedule as much as we can, at least with kind of what I call the public areas, the communal areas of the house. So for example, my youngest will vacuum every Sunday is what it's supposed to be. Now, this isn't set in stone. We certainly all have stuff going on that we may not have time or maybe miss it. But, involving the kids again is having that set schedule, especially with the laundry in my house. So because there are so many of us, it used to be, we've kind of fallen away from this, but one person was designated to Sundays. So my daughter would have Sundays to do her laundry. I would generally have Saturdays because I was doing both mine and my youngest. But having that time kind of, I don't really want to say a schedule, but it's a loose schedule, right? So there are certain things that have to be done every day. Load the dishwasher, unload the dishwasher, put it on a rotating schedule with your kids. They can certainly help, certainly be involved. And then those bigger tasks, assign them once a month. Clean the windows once a month. Vacuum once a week, whatever it ends up being. But certainly get those kids involved at a young age.
So I love that. And I've struggled with that personally. I read a book and it kind of motivated me to come up with a spreadsheet for my own schedule on everything that's going to be done on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. Completely failed. Probably because I was being overzealous and unrealistic, right? Because, who does a deep clean of their kitchen, every Tuesday night when they come home from work, right? Like it just wasn't a realistic pattern. So what advice would you give to other mothers who are trying this on for size and are struggling with it?
I would say take on the small tasks on a daily basis. That's the easiest way. You'll feel better about your home. You'll feel better about your space. But then save those bigger projects, the deep cleans, the windows, the things that you're not going to do every single day for a weekend. It may not be what you want to spend your weekend doing, but there's just not enough hours in the day when you have small kids that want your attention in the afternoon and evening to focus on those things. So you have to kind of set your priorities and unfortunately, some things fall off with that, right? So some things you have to give up, and whether that's having the kitchen deep clean once a week versus once a month versus on a Tuesday versus on a Saturday, something has to give. There are only so many hours in the day, so don't beat yourself up about it, but take care of those little tasks on a daily basis so that you feel better about your space.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about vacation time. And I know that I've only known you for a few years, but during that period of time, I've noticed that you and your husband go away together without kids. So I'm curious, has this always been what you've done during your marriage? And, talk to me a little bit about how you spend time, either, with your significant other or also one-to-one time with each of the children.
Yes. So we do travel alone. We have not always done this. This is certainly something in the last 4 years or so, really because of the age of the children. That makes it a lot easier. I don't have family close to where I can have somebody come and stay with them. So it's kind of like a once a year thing where I can get my mom to come in, or they can go actually in the summer and to my mom's house. So that we have the support that we need to be able to take those trips. When the kids were younger, those trips didn't happen. So my husband works on the weekends, so we can't just go away for a weekend usually. So when the kids were young, I would travel with the kids over weekends, and to kind of get away. But our trips, that's just the two of us, really didn't happen until the last few years. And unfortunately, that's just kind of the way it worked for us, because when they're young, they just have a lot more needs. They're less independent, and it's harder to leave them in the care of someone else for a longer period of time.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. What about, the fact that you are a mother of four kids? Do you feel that you're able to spend a quality one-on-one time with each of your four children?
I do, mainly because I make it a priority. So we only have one girl, so we do a lot of shopping together, just the two of us. But at the same time, my boys really like to shop as well. So they all get solo shopping trips with mom very frequently. But when they were younger, it was just the way that their birth order kind of goes. I still talk about my youngest two as the boys, because I've got my oldest boy and then my girl, and then what I call the two little boys. And they're not close in age. They're over 5 years apart, but just because of the way they've grown. So there are a lot of trips that have taken place with just the two little boys. Whereas when they were younger, it would be the oldest that would get to go. But we do try and spend as much time, especially now that they're in, sports. We'll travel with one and get the ride home with just the one to talk. But we do try and get that time alone with all of them as much as we can.
So in close, Ruth, and I know that you touched upon this before, but I wanted to just, comment a little bit about how you have maintained your health throughout all this, because I do know that you make health your priority. You're leaving work, you're going for runs. So talk a little bit more about how you manage that.
It's not easy. It really isn't. It has to be made a priority. And for me, it comes in waves, right? I'll be really, really good for a few months, and then I kind of fall off. And I think everybody goes through that. But for me, it was finding the time of day that works. For some people, that's taking a walk over lunch. For me, it's that time in between work at the end of the day and dinner, just because that's when the kids are busy and I can go kind of do my own thing. Some people, it's the first thing in the morning. Have to find the time that works and make it a priority, really.
And that is easier said than done. I have to be honest with you. So
no, it is not easy at all. Absolutely not.
Yeah, it takes real effort to, I think, put yourself first, especially whenever there's people around you everywhere you look that are vying for your attention and your time, like your family, your kids, your husband, your employer, your clients. I mean, it's just so to keep that container for your health it's hard, but it's also important. So So Ruth, how can our listeners find you or contact you?
Absolutely. So I can be found on Rincker Law's website, rinkerlaw.com. I am also on LinkedIn and be happy to receive messages that way as well.
I so appreciate you taking the time to speak here today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Billable Mom. At The Billable Mom, we don't pretend to have the answers, but instead have all the questions. Please find us on social media and join the conversation at The Billable Mom on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, Pinterest, and YouTube. We also have a Facebook group where like-minded billable moms find solidarity and provide a resource to one another. You can learn more about The Billable Mom and our picks for juggling work and motherhood at www.thebillablemom.com. You can also connect with Cari Rincker directly on social media at Cari Rincker. Until next time, let's calm the chaos 6 minutes at a time.